Now the first recipe we're going to make from the stocks is a real classic, the beef stock. For that I'm using two kinds of bones. Here I'm using shank because it contains the marrow as well. It contains some lovely meat which will really brown, and a bone as well. And the bone contains gelatin, and that's what we need when creating a stock. Because later when we reduce the stock, it will give the richness and the thickness. So it will really give the body. For that I'm also gonna add just bones without any meat. These are a lot cheaper, these are quite expensive. So in the end, the whole recipe is quite expensive, but to cut costs, I'm also adding just beef bones because these cost like a third or a quarter of the beef. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna place them on an oven tray, and then we're going to toast them at 200 degrees Celsius for about 45 minutes to an hour. And what this will do, it will allow the bones to roast and really give them that lovely, deep, rich flavor that we are looking for in our stock. So just place them next to each other. Don't really stack them. If you do this, then the roasting isn't going to go all the way around, and we really want a nice even roast. We're going to roast them for 45 minutes for an hour, but halfway just give a little mix to ensure that not just the top part is roasted, but also the bottom part. Now you could also make this recipe just with the bones. It's still going to be a very delicious stock. But I'm adding the meat because it's going to add a lot more richness to the final result. Now while the beef bones and the beef shank are roasting in the oven, let's talk about the other base of the recipe. Of course we have our vegetables, we have our aromatics like the herbs and garlic, and we have some lovely spices, black pepper and coriander seeds. Some tomato. This you don't really need to add, but I just love the richness and the umami of the tomato, and it really brings the whole broth to another level. And I always like to add red wine as well. This is also optional, but again, for me it brings another flavor profile that I really like in a good stock. Now here, let's talk first about the vegetables. I'm using 5 kinds. I have some carrot, some celeriac, some onion, leek and celery. These all bring something to the broth. The carrot brings some earthiness, the celeriac as well, the onion and the leek bring a lot of freshness, just like the celery. It all brings something to your broth. If you're looking for a different flavor profile, you need to add other things. Maybe you can leave some out. It really depends on the desired outcome. The same counts for the aromatics. I'm adding bay leaf, I'm adding thyme and rosemary. It all brings another richness, it brings depth in. It really highlights the good things about a beef stock. But if you're looking for something else, maybe add oregano or any other herb. And apart from the aromatics, let's talk about the spices as well. I use the coriander seeds and the black pepper. But if you are looking for something a bit more Asian, you could add ginger as well. You could add chili flakes, anything you like. The first step is to add a drizzle of a neutral oil to a big pot. And then we're going to roast our vegetables. What roasting does, especially for like the carrots and the celeriac and the onions, it sweetens them as well, because there is already a lot of sweetness in the onions and in the carrots. And by caramelizing it, we're gonna build a whole different flavor profile. Right now it's very sweet and earthy. We're gonna make it a bit more caramelly and really bring out some umami as well. So let's just dump it in all at once. And then we're going to roast it until everything has a lovely golden color. Now, while the vegetables are roasting, because it's going to take some time, it's going to take at least 5 to 10 minutes to really get that lovely golden color, let's prep the other ingredients. And there's not much to prep on the aromatics and on the wine, but there is something to prep on the tomatoes, because I'm using canned tomatoes. Might sound strange, all these lovely fresh ingredients and then canned tomatoes, but it makes a lot of sense, because canned tomatoes are usually made from overripe tomatoes, so they are super flavorful, they are really rich, and there is just one thing we need to do to prep them, and that is blend them with a hand blender, because this will create an even paste, and later on it's going to create an even cooking. Otherwise you're left with big pieces of tomato. You don't want that, because you want a nice, even roast. and talk about a nice even roast, there's another thing I would love to share with you guys. Because let's just take a look at this carrot and at this carrot. You can imagine that when roasting, this does not have as much surface as this. Because this, let's say it's 10 grams, this, let's say it's 1 gram. If I have 10 pieces like this, it's gonna have a lot more surface. And a lot more surface means more roasting, more flavors. That's why it's always super important, especially for a beef stock, that you cut the vegetables super fine, because it's gonna create more surface, more roasting equals more flavor. Now, as you can see, we have some lovely caramelization, which means it's done. Also on the bottom, there is a lot going on. Let me scoop it off a bit. Here, this is what we're looking for. This is flavor. Now, we're going to add our tomato, our blended canned tomatoes. So what this does, it deglazes the pan and it softens the fond. So it is mixed in with the vegetables. And then what we do, we pan fry it for another 5 minutes to create another fond, but this time with the tomato paste. So it's layer on layer on layer. Now that another fond has formed on the bottom and the tomatoes have reduced enough, we can deglaze the pan once more. So that's a third time already. Well, it's actually a second time already. But it's the third part of the process. So we're going to add our red wine. And it's quite a lot, but I just always love the richness that it brings. And what we're gonna do, we're gonna boil almost all the red wine down. And this allows for a rich flavor and not a red, like winey flavor. You don't want that, because then it's more like a kind of alcohol. If you would add your water now straight away, then it would miss a lot of depth. So really let this reduce as well. What we're also already going to add is the black pepper and coriander. We're going to add our thyme, rosemary, bay leaf, and the garlic. The garlic I've cut in half just to make the extraction of the flavors a bit easier. And then we're going to give it a quick mix and let this reduce all the way. Now, I didn't add the herbs and spices any sooner, because then they might burn because of all the pan frying and reducing to like a really low quantity. But now, because of the large amount of red wine, it's safe to do. Because we're not going to reduce the red wine all the way down again to start the pan frying process. No, we're just going to reduce it down to remove the alcohol flavor and create a rich flavor profile. It's going to take another, let's say 5 to 10 minutes, just on a medium-high heat. Keep an eye on it, because you don't want it to burn. Now, as you can see, almost all the wine has evaporated, and I am left with a lovely brownish caramelized color. The smell, it's spot on. It's so good. Really, you gotta try this one, because your whole house will smell like, well, like red wine, like caramelization, like herbs, like vegetables. And especially when I'm gonna add the beef, it's gotta be next level. Definitely want to try. So that's it for this step. Now we can take the bones out of the oven. So you can imagine what flavor they now have, because you see all the browning, you see all the Maillard reaction, and now we can add them to the pan. And just a little tip, because I have toasted the bones, the meat, you don't need to blanch them. Normally, if you would do this raw, because you can actually also make a beef stock with raw bones, so then you don't toast them. For me, I prefer toasting, but if you do this, then you always need to blanch your bones or shanks, because then it's the same as with you're making a chicken stock, for example. Then all the scum starts to flow to the top, and you need to remove that, otherwise you're left with a cloudy stock, and you don't want that. Plus, the flavor isn't that nice, so that's why it's super important to do that. But by toasting the bones and the shanks, this process is already done. So now I can just add them to the pan, and then we're going to cover the bones all the way with water. Let's say around 3 to 4 liters of water. Don't put too much water, because then you dilute the flavor too much. And then once the stock is done, you need to reduce it for such a long time. Super unnecessary. So that's gonna save you a lot of time and energy. And yeah, just add enough to just submerge it. It's better to add a bit more later on if you feel like they're not submerged anymore than to add way too much all at once. So the water and add it to submerge them. Now, and to add even more flavor, what we're gonna do, we're gonna deglaze the baking tray with some water because there is a lot of flavor, there is a lot of fond on there, so we don't want to waste that. First, what I'm gonna do is I have a little bowl to remove as much fat as possible because I don't want to add it to my stock because then later on I need to remove it again. So just let it drip for a couple of seconds. Keep this because it's great to use for pan frying or even as a base for a brioche. So instead of butter you add that. So good. Now we're gonna deglaze the pan. Normally when the baking tray is still hot, it sizzles a lot, but it has cooled down already. So what I'm gonna do, I just added a touch of water. I'm gonna put it back in the oven for around 5 to 10 minutes. It's gonna soak up all these lovely flavors and then I'm gonna add it to the pan as well. Okay, as you can see, the water has turned a lovely brown color and you just wanna check that all these fonds are completely soaked up and that they have loosened from the baking tray. And then we can gently, be careful because the tray is still hot, we can gently pour it into the pan. Because now the tray is all soaked up, it's ready to be cleaned, and if you would have soaked this with water, put it in the dishwasher, I mean, the dishwasher is not gonna know the flavor, but your stock definitely will. So don't waste this step, super important. Now, ensure that your bones are all the way submerged with water and then bring it to a simmer. Let it simmer on a low heat for around at least 8 hours. Really depends on the bones you use as well. You just want to make sure that all the gelatin has been extracted from the bones. So that's super important. I'm doing this without a lid. When you make a stock, always do it without a lid because you want some of the water to evaporate and you also want it to be able that there is gonna be a little skin on top. And if you cover it with a lid, then there is too much steam and then the skin is not going to be able to form. The skin, that's all the impurities in your broth and you want to remove that easily. And for me, that is definitely the best way to do it. Now, as you can see, it has been a while because the stock has been going at it for over 12 hours. I left it overnight, so all the bones, all the meat, all the vegetables, it all has released its lovely flavor into the water. And as you can see, the stock has a super rich, lovely brown color, which means we are ready to drain it. Now to let it drain, what I usually do with a stock, I already place a fine sieve in the colander to really let it drain all the way. What I'm gonna do this time is I'm just gonna use the colander to let it drain as much as possible, and then I'm gonna pass it through a fine sauce sieve. Because there might be small pieces of bone in here, there might be other impurities that I don't want in the stock. With chicken or vegetable or like a seafood stock, that's not really the case quite often. Maybe you can do that as well with those, but for a beef, I always do it at first. So just put the pan next to the colander and then just gently scoop it on top. Always beware, I mean, I'm wearing a white chef's jacket, so I'm gonna do it gentle, not to make it dirty. And then we're gonna let it drip for at least 30 minutes so I don't waste a single drop. Then it has been at least 30 minutes, so that means we can pass it through a fine sauce sieve. A fine sieve is good as well, but I really prefer a sauce sieve because they are super, super fine. Just gently pour it on top. And then I'm gonna use a ladle to tap the side to help the process of passing it through the fine sauce sieve. Don't use the ladle to press it through because you want the impurities to stay within the sieve. So just take a ladle, tap the side, and as you can see, it makes the whole process a lot easier. Now let me just show you, this was still all in the sauce. That's why I always prefer a fine sauce sieve. You can see the grit on the outside, almost no solids can go through, and you're left with a super clear stock. Now, we're gonna put the pan back on the heat, and with the ladle we're going to remove any fat that's floating on top. I know that, for example, with a chicken stock you can always leave it on because it does have a lot of flavor, but there is so much fat that it's too much. I want it to be at around 90 degrees Celsius because what that does, it allows the water to start moving. So there's a bit of movement in the stock, and what that does, it combines all the little fat pieces, all the little oil pieces that are in the stock, and those start to float to the top. And then we can remove this. For this process, I always loved using a narrow pot. If you would use a very wide pot to reduce it quickly, you could do it, but then it's super difficult to remove all the fat because the fat will be all at the surface. And if you have a very narrow pot, then it will be very close to each other and you can remove it without wasting anything. Now, what I'm gonna do is I have a ladle and I'm going to just put it over here so you guys can see it a bit easier as well. You put the ladle in the middle, and then you gently start swirling the stock. And what that does, it pushes the fat to the outside. And then I can easily scoop it up without getting any of the stock and just the oil. Now, over here I have a glass jar. Just going to put it in and continue until all the fat is removed. Sometimes it takes some time, but that's okay because I want to reduce this stock anyway. So that's absolutely fine. Just take it step by step. If you want, you can also cool it down in your fridge and then remove the fat once it's solidified. But I prefer to do it this way because especially when you're making large batches, you're not going to cool down 100 liters of beef stock. Now the beef stock has reduced and I am super happy with the flavor. So I'm just going to show you guys the lovely texture on it, the lovely color. Like this, it's already ready to be served if you want to serve it in like a kind of broth, stock soup thing. It's great to use as a base for other sauces as well. You can use it for recipes, for preparations, but yeah, like this, it is already super delicious. A great way to continue cooking it is to use it for a demi-glace. And the demi-glace is what I have over here. And as you can see, it is a bit richer in color. It's thicker as well. And the flavor is also more intense, and it's super easy to make it because you just let it reduce a bit more. I think halfway more, and then you'll be able to create a lovely demi-glace, and that's a super nice beef sauce. This is also good on its own to serve as a sauce. So this is the beautiful beef stock, and this is a lovely demi-glace. Now, because it is a stock, I didn't add salt for seasoning because you don't know what you're going to do with it. If you're going to reduce it all the way down, then it's going to be super salty if you season it from the start on. So this is unseasoned, but because it has reduced a bit already, there has been so much flavor added, I already find it very nice and delicious. You could season it with a touch of salt, maybe a touch of soy sauce, because that's also very salty. And if you want to bring a bit of balance to those heavy flavors, I always love adding a bit of freshness as well. So maybe a touch of ponzu, maybe a touch of red wine vinegar. That all depends on the result you are looking for. Watch the entire series on Gronda and start mastering the fundamentals of cooking. Just click the link in the description.